South Carolina. South Carolina seems pretty good at the start of this section. Cora has a job. She has a place to live. People seem to respect her. She's getting an education. She's learning to read. Things seem good. But what we start to find is that there's a sort of respectability that's going on in this town, a sort of a politics even of respectability that masks a really insidious power imbalance. And so one of the questions this raises is, how does respectability actually serve to mask white power in South Carolina? And how does that respectability even mask things like theft within this section? So in South Carolina, like I said, things seem pretty good until Cora gets shifted to the museum for work. And I don't know about you, but as I was reading this section, I felt my stomach just churning and kind of nodding up in anger. Because of course, Cora is put behind these glass panels in order to act out for hours a day scenes from the life of an African. So she's put behind this glass panel and is pretending to sweep the floor in darkest Africa, as the first panel is called. And then she's on a slave ship where she's supposed to be the kind of cheeky slave child who's being transported across the Atlantic. And then finally, she's at a plantation where she sits spinning. If the absolute horror of those scenes in terms of their juxtaposition with what's come earlier in the novel, when we've seen a Jerry brought from Africa on the slave ships, when we've seen the horrors of the Randall plantation, if that sort of contrast doesn't churn your stomach, then you've not been paying attention at this stage, because it's absolutely blood-chilling. And then the crowds start coming into the Museum of Natural Wonders. And they taunt, they make faces, they try to get her attention. And what starts to become really obvious is she's like an animal on display at the zoo. This world that seems to have offered freedom from the Randall plantation is literally another form of captivity for her. And yet, it all masquerades as science, as history. This is the Museum of Natural Wonders, after all, where they are trying to recreate with historical accuracy the experiences of the Black community as they've come from Africa through the Mid-Atlantic Passage to slavery. All in the name of science, all in the name of history, all in the name of respectability. And then you get the politics of racial uplift going on. We are trying to improve your race for you, as Cora keeps hearing as she's being educated. And as she learns when she ends up at the hospital with Dr. Stevens. The point of all of this is actually just more control. And that makes us start to wonder, well, wait a minute. If this is what respectability does, is it really respectable? I mean, what is the ethical implications of a respectability that comes at the cost of imprisoning, not on a plantation anymore, but imprisoning by the government for the sake of study? Is that respectability just because it's got the government stamp of approval on it? Is it respectability, or is it somehow okay and acceptable because it has the respectability of the museum stamp of approval on it? Or how about then when she goes to the hospital for her exam and Dr. Stevens presents her with the opportunity to have a procedure that will render her sterile? Does the respectability of the medical profession render forced sterilization and eugenics? Because that's what's really running underneath this entire idea, is the idea of eugenics, right? We're only going to let the good of your race breed. Does the respectability of science make that okay? I would hope as a reader, as you get to these parts, you're saying, no, absolutely not, because that's what you should be saying. The problem is some of the ethical theorists we've looked at could actually be used to potentially support some of these ideas. If you have a sloppy understanding of Mill, you might think, well, greatest good for the greatest number. I guess if you could say that it's in the best interest of society that the people who are the weakest or the not smartest or the not the most beautiful don't get to reproduce, well, that would be like for the greatest happiness of the most people, right? And if that's what you're thinking, you've got utilitarianism about half right. The greatest good for the greatest number is true, but Mill had a much more nuanced idea of it than that. where he would say that actually this is in nobody's best interest. But you can see the problem. It's easy to use our ethical systems to start saying, well, this is going to improve human life. But is it? Or is that just a way of hiding power? Is that just a way that we make ourselves feel better about decisions that we know are not the right ones? So in this South Carolina section, as you read about the museum and as you read about this eugenics program, I want you to keep thinking about Mill. I want you to also think about Kant and Aristotle and what they might have to say about this situation. And figure out how might some of the ethical theories we've been looking at help us to explain why these ideas are so bad and why they kind of turn our stomachs and make us think, if this is respectability, I want nothing to do with it.